And today our mission is, well, it's a really critical one, maybe one of the most challenging we've tackled. We are diving headfirst into the ongoing war in Sudan. But look, we're not just going to list the facts on the ground. As truly devastating as they are, we need to go deeper. We have to peel back the layers and really critically examine the narratives being spun around this conflict, especially how certain powerful groups are trying to frame it to suit their own agendas.
That's right. And the way these narratives are constructed is frankly quite insidious. Our sources point towards a strategy that uses something like you call it a scarecrow analogy.
Exactly, like a manufactured enemy, a straw man, put up deliberately to divert attention, right? To justify actions that, let's face it, might otherwise look completely indefensible, even horrific.
Precisely. And in Sudan, the specific scarecrow being used, according to our sources, is the specter of Islamists.
The convenient enemy, easy to demonize, easy to rally people against, both locally and maybe internationally too.
Exactly. It's designed to manipulate perceptions on multiple levels.
So what are we aiming to uncover today? We're going to try and figure out who really benefits from spinning these stories, what are the real atrocities happening that these narratives try to obscure, and what does all this tell us about the true nature of the fight, and maybe more importantly, the real motives of the players involved.
We'll definitely be challenging some assumptions today, getting into the weeds of the moral and political complexities.
Absolutely. This isn't just about reciting facts. It's about understanding the truth behind the spin. So let's get into it.
Okay. So what's really striking is how these narratives build this kind of alternative reality, almost. Our sources highlight this persistent, overarching story being pushed, one that frames the war not just as, a power struggle or a typical civil war, but as something much bigger, almost mythical, an Armageddon, they call it, against Islamists.
Armageddon, wow, that's powerful language, evokes strong emotions, rallies people.
Definitely. It elevates the conflict beyond simple politics into this grand existential battle.
Okay, so let's unpack that. They're not just saying we're fighting for territory or we want political control. They're framing it as, what, a fight for the soul of Sudan against this existential Islamist threat.
Precisely. And central to that story, the Sudanese armed forces, the SAF, they get branded quite deliberately as this Islamist army.
Right. And how do they build that brand? Because the sources mention some very specific, maybe even exaggerated links being made.
Yeah, the goal is total demonization of the SAF, to rally support against them by painting them as this monolithic, dangerous entity. So they connect the SAF to all sorts of global threats, often with pretty flimsy evidence, it seems. You see these alleged links to Iran, to Hamas, even stretching to ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Wow. So just lumping them in with every group that triggers international alarm bells?
Exactly. It taps into those pre-existing global fears, creates a sense of urgency, make the SAF seem like part of a bigger, scarier network. And incredibly, the narrative even dips into deep history and religious texts, invoking figures like Al-Hussein at Kufa, painting this picture of a, righteous, almost holy war against pure evil.
It's demonization by association, then, creating the strong emotional pull for support, maybe even intervention.
Or at least political and material backing for their side. The more monstrous the enemy seems, the more justified their actions appear.
Makes sense. So who are the architects? Who's actually crafting and pushing this narrative? The research names, or at least groups?
Yes, the sources are quite specific. The main proponents seem to be remnants of the Forces of Freedom and Change, the FFC, described tellingly as having ever-shifting hues, which suggests opportunism, fluid allegiances, pretty much. They're joined by elements tied to the Framework Agreement coalition. Remember, that agreement was already controversial, seen by many as a way for certain factions to grab power.
And specific individuals.
Ibrahim Rugani is mentioned. He's a founding member of the pro-RSF Taugesis Alliance.
Taugesis, that's basically a political front for the RSF, right? Supporting Hemedti and his forces.
Correct. So you see the connections forming. It looks like a coordinated effort to shape how the war is perceived. And beyond these political groups, the sources also mention self-endorsed intellectual giants.
The thinkers who give it an academic or ideological gloss.
Exactly. Lending authority, acting as sort of thought leaders for this manufactured reality.
Okay, that's a tangled web already. FFC remnants, Framework Agreement people, pro-RSF alliances, intellectuals. But here's the bit that really jumps out, the contradiction. Our sources say the Islamist Popular Congress Party is also involved in pushing this supposedly anti-Islamist narrative. How does that even work? An Islamist party backing an anti-Islamist Armageddon? That just blows the whole premise apart, doesn't it?
It immediately throws up a huge red flag.
Right.
It fundamentally undermines any claim of ideological purity they might try to make. It screams political opportunism. Pure and simple.
So it's not really about fighting Islamism as a principle.
It strongly suggests it's more about tactical self-serving alliances. The anti-Islamist label becomes a flag of convenience, a tool to gain power or influence or maybe foreign backing, even if it means buddying up with former ideological foes or even other Islamists who are just playing a different angle now.
It exposes the cynical, transactional nature of it all, strips away any pretense of principle right from the start.
Absolutely.
So within this grand contradictory story, Where do Hemedti and his rapid support forces, the RSF, fit in? Are they the heroes leading this charge?
That's another fascinating and very revealing piece of the puzzle. The RSF and Hemedti are actually, according to the sources, relegated to a secondary role in this narrative.
Secondary, not the main players, not the aggressors.
Exactly. They're not presented as the central force or the ideological drivers. Instead, they're framed as, well, a necessary tool. Almost incidental, a blunt instrument needed for this bigger ideological fight against the Islamist SF.
So they're just the muscle, the means to an end in this mythical battle.
Precisely. And think about what that does. It cleverly shifts the focus away from the RSF's own actions, their own history.
Their atrocities, their power grabs.
All of it. Their violence, the looting, the human rights abuses. It all gets reframed as just part of this supposedly righteous crusade. It provides a strategic shield for their behavior.
That's a masterful piece of political deflection, really. Cynical, but masterful.
Utterly cynical. It's PR spin on a horrifying scale. They're not the villains. They're just the pragmatic instrument needed to fight the real bad guys.
Which brings us right to the core of this. This narrative isn't just about ideology, is it? The sources say it's a double-edged sword, serving very practical, very disturbing purposes. What's the first edge?
Right. This is where the calculated benefit becomes crystal clear. The first edge is all about providing a pretext, a cover story, for what the sources call authoritarian collusion.
Collusion between who? These factions we mentioned, FFC, Framework People, Popular Congress Party, and the RSF itself.
Exactly. And it's not something new that just popped up with the war. The sources trace it back, saying this collusion began with deception to push through the framework agreement.
So the seeds were sown earlier. That agreement had hidden agendas.
It seems so. The sources mention its overt and covert substance, meaning there was the public face a path to civilian rule, maybe? But underneath, hidden arrangements designed to facilitate this power grab and legitimize the RSF's growing influence.
A calculated move to normalize teaming up with a violent militia.
It certainly looks that way, rationalizing what would otherwise seem like an unholy alliance.
Yeah, and a huge part of this first edge, critically, is defending their shared patron, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. Our sources are blunt about the UAE's active and deeply controversial role. How is that being spun?
It's quite something. Why would these Sudanese groups go to such lengths to defend a foreign power that's, well, actively involved in the destruction of their country? The UAE's aggression, its support for the killing, the displacement, it gets completely reframed. It's presented not as interference or hostility, but as a legitimate struggle by a sisterly nation.
A sisterly nation.
Against the specter of political Islam.
There it is again, the scarecrow.
Exactly. It's a masterstroke of deflection aimed at the international community. Frame the UAE's actions as part of the global fight against extremism, and suddenly it taps into those cumulative fears of the Western imagination, as this source puts it.
Fears that are already there may be easily triggered.
Right. Fears that require little prodding to offer material and political support for such delusions. It's cynical, but effective, exploiting existing biases.
It's like playing on international anxieties to sanitize what a foreign power is doing. The source uses that powerful analogy, comparing it to how Israel has used the scarecrow of Iran's nuclear threat. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, it's a really sharp comparison. Think about it. For decades, the perceived threat from Iran has been used to justify policies, gain support, secure aid. It's a powerful narrative tool. And these Sudanese factions, backed by the UAE, are doing something similar with this anti-Islamist banner.
A prepackaged story that resonates with certain global powers wary of political Islam.
Precisely. Makes it much easier to get political backing, maybe weapons, maybe money, even for actions causing immense suffering and chaos.
And the core motive, the sources say, is
a pretext for domination. Plain and simple. Domination for the Sudanese factions wanting power, and for their foreign patrons like the UAE seeking regional influence and economic gain.
Leveraging a global fear for a very local, very brutal power grab.
That sums it up well.
Okay, so that's the first edge. Authoritarian collusion, protecting foreign patrons, all disguised as an ideological war. But you said it was double-edged. What's the second edge of this narrative sword?
The second edge gets even murkier, more venal perhaps. It's about opportunistic extortion and bribery. It reveals the deeply self-serving nature of many pushing this narrative. It's not just about grand politics, it's about individual gain.
Extortion, that's a heavy word.
Yeah.
How are they using this narrative to, well, blackmail people? And who are these elites being targeted?
Blackmail is strong, yes, but the sources suggest it reflects the coercive dynamics. They list who these elites are. Retired, or rather idle politicians, people out of power but hungry to get back in.
Okay.
Businessmen looking for profits in the chaos. Paid journalists, happy to spread the narrative. Even civil society activists who are disconnected from their society may be easily co-opted. Plus some embassy and international local staff.
And researchers, too. The source mentions them pontificating from home and acting like snitches.
Yes, quite damningly. Researchers shaping opinions from afar, perhaps based on fabrications and fertile imaginations. Essentially, it's a whole range of people with stakes in the political or economic game who can be pressured or tempted.
Tempted by what? Future jobs? Money? Or threatened with being labeled pro-Islamist?
Both, it seems. The promise of positions, financial rewards, or simply avoiding the stigma of being branded an enemy in this fabricated ideological war.
And the hypocrisy. Our sources mention their past dealings with Islamists. These anti-Islamists weren't always singing this tune.
Exactly. This is the whitewashing part, and it's incredibly cynical. These are often the same figures whose pens and acts fell short of confronting the Islamists, the Kazan, during their long rule.
Kizan, that's the term for the old ruling Islamists,
Yeah.
right?
And the sources even say these figures often aligned with them when it served their interests.
So pragmatic collaboration back then, not principled opposition. Seems like it. So now, these individuals who either failed to stand up to the Islamists or actually worked with them, they see this new anti-Islamist narrative as a golden opportunity to whitewash their records.
A convenient way to rewrite their own history.
And they seem to genuinely believe victory is guaranteed, tied to the UAE's patronage and the Janjaweed hordes, a derogatory term for the RSF. They see the RSF's weapons as somehow essential to counter the Muslim Brotherhood's arsenal, repeating the simplistic lines of their ideologues.
That's an incredible level of either self-deception or just pure cynicism. Claiming to fight Islamists now, after working with them, using the very militia committing atrocities, and doing all this while chanting no to war. The sources point out that glaring contradiction.
How do you reconcile that? Pushing for peace while backing the violence. The analysis is blunt. All this disregards the obvious truth that pitting arms against arms yields only war, with all its calamities. Calamities the Sudanese know all too well.
So the no to war slogan is just a flagrant contradiction, a mere tattered banner, a bloody shirt, as the source poetically puts it, stained by the very war they claim to oppose.
A deceptive facade, then, hiding the real goal, power and patronage, enabled by the conflict itself.
It's a rhetorical trick. Gain sympathy, look legitimate, while fueling the fire.
And the endgame for these opportunists, assuming they get their victory, what jobs are they after?
Oh, the sources are quite specific about the spoils they envision. After this, it says, those seeking to lead an anti-corruption commission can take one. Those eyeing the Ministry of Energy can claim it.
Tangible power, control over resources.
Exactly. Though, interestingly, those aspiring to the premiership must wait, for the struggle over it is deferred for now.
So they're already carving up the future government, even deciding who has to wait their turn.
It paints a picture of intense transactional politics, not driven by peace or justice, but by who gets which ministry. The whole thing is summed up as a pretext for opportunistic extortion and bribery, a grotesque negotiation over the future of a suffering nation.
What a grim portrayal, utterly self-interested. So where does this leave the actual people of Sudan living through the hell of this war? This whole narrative construct just ignores their reality, doesn't it?
Completely. And this disconnect is maybe the most tragic part. The narrative versus the lived experience, it's a chasm. The sources stress this urgently. The Sudanese people's view of the war isn't about abstract historical debates right now, though those issues do need addressing eventually.
Their view is shaped by the horror they see daily.
It's a direct response to the atrocities these elites seek to obscure. From the genocide in El Geneina to the destruction and looting in Khartoum, Yala, Madani. From fancy high-rises turned battlegrounds to the desperate conditions in places like Zamzam IDP camp. The horror is immediate, undeniable.
It's like the narrative spinners are on another planet. The source uses that phrase, cognitive muddle and epistemological fallacy, like politics unfolding on Mars.
Precisely. A total disconnect from reality. It signifies this profound intellectual and moral failure. They're so wrapped up in their games, their narratives, their alliances, they seem unable or unwilling to grasp the suffering their actions enable.
While they play politics, people are dealing with the RSF's brutality.
Brutality bolstered by RSF weapons and UAE backing. It's a war driven by, as the sources state, a fascist militia attempting to seize power by force. And the atrocities aren't side effects, they're expressions of the RSF's true nature.
Okay, let's talk about that true nature. How does the RSF's actual conduct blow apart any attempt to portray them as liberators or even a lesser evil?
We have to look squarely at the evidence, the actions detail, and the sources. The RSF is positioned unequivocally as a fascist militia attempting to seize power by force. Their actions aren't about liberation or fighting Islamists. They're the hallmarks of a brutal, opportunistic force hungry for power.
Let's get specific. The sources mention the occupation of civilian homes.
Yes, systematically. Across Khartoum, Darfur, occupying homes, expelling families, turning neighborhoods into military zones or personal loot. It's a pattern of terror and displacement. But the narrative proponents, they actually try to justify it.
Justify kicking people out of their homes? How?
By questioning how they could leave and where they would go, basically shifting blame to the victims. It's dehumanizing, a transparent whitewash of a war crime.
And the sexual violence. Reports have been horrific and consistent.
Truly one of the most disturbing aspects. The systematic rape of hundreds, if not thousands, of Sudanese women. It's a documented tactic of terror. Yet the groups backing the RSF might issue some weak condemnation, but then, almost in the same breath, they'll fabricate incidents to blame the army.
So muddying the waters, deflecting blame from their allies.
Actively. It's not just hypocrisy. It's a deliberate effort to deny justice, a shocking disregard for human dignity, performative condemnation followed by blame shifting.
The sources also use the term genocide and mention racially motivated killings, especially against the Moslems people. That's incredibly serious.
It is. The RSF has committed genocide and racially motivated killings against the Moslems, particularly in places like El Geneina. And this isn't hidden. It's documented by the world and even by the militia's own hysterical racist chants during the killings. The ethnic hatred is clear.
Yet the narrative pushers
Audaciously blame the victims, accusing them of starting the violence. It's a chilling classic tactic. Re-victimize the harm to absolve the perpetrators, rewriting history in real time.
and attacks on displacement camps, places meant to be safe.
The RSF shells them, targeting people already displaced, already vulnerable. And then, with staggering cynicism, their allied civil society groups, the ones claiming to advocate for people, rush to label these camps as militarized bases.
Justifying attacks on civilians by calling them military targets.
Exactly. Stripping them of protected status. All these actions, home occupations, rape, genocide, shelling camps, racial violence, they demolish any claim that the RSF is anything but a fascist militia seizing power through terror.
And throughout all this, the elephant in the room, or rather, the drone in the sky, the UAE's complicity. How do they keep whitewashing that?
It's deeply troubling how the UAE's active destructive role gets spun. Sources say the UAE bombs power stations, water dams, and civilian infrastructure with its drones. These aren't accidents. They're deliberate attacks on civilian life.
Yet figures like Hamdok, the former PM, talk about a media campaign against the UAE.
Exactly. Hamdok claims this supposed media campaign somehow honors the Sudanese. It's an outright denial of documented aggression, painting a destructive foreign power as a friend despite the suffering they're causing.
And this isn't the UAE's first time playing this kind of game in Sudan, is it? There's history here.
Crucial history. The sources remind us the UAE backed Bashir's Islamist regime right up until weeks before its fall. They mention hundreds of millions of dollars granted to Bashir's regime in March 2019, just before he was ousted in April.
So a history of backing whoever serves their interests, regardless of ideology or human rights.
It points to a consistent pattern of opportunistic foreign policy. Their current support for the RSF is just the latest, most devastating example. It's about projecting power and securing interests, not stability for Sudan.
And finally, the attempts to repackage Hemedti himself. The sources push back hard against portraying him as some kind of revolutionary leader.
Yes, that narrative is completely debunked. The idea that he represents marginalized periphery's grievances. The sources argue he's actually one of the tools of their suppression, impoverishment, and plunder. His violence has only hurt the communities he supposedly champions.
And the comparison to John Goring, that revered leader.
Utterly cynical. Figures like Nasreddin Abdelbari and Yassir Arman tried that in Paris in 2024, now picked up by the boys of the SPLM Hilo. Comparing Hemedti, leader of a mercenary force known for atrocities, to Garang, who fought for justice. It's fundamentally flawed, deeply misleading.
It really exposes the hypocrisy of the whole anti-Islamist claim too, doesn't it?
Completely. Because the ranks of those aligning with Hemedti are filled with them, filled with Islamists. There's ongoing collaboration with the RSF, still led by the staunchest remnants of the Islamic Front.
So they're collaborating with Islamists while claiming to fight an Islamist army.
While also showing continuous servitude to the UAE, the power that backed Bashir's Islamist regime. The contradictions are staggering. It's a tangled mess of self-interest, deception, and a shocking disregard for truth and human life.
Which leaves us with that profoundly disturbing question. If everyone's playing these cynical games, who is actually advocating for the Sudanese people in all this?
That's the heart of it. And the sources condemn this opportunism across the board. This war, they state very clearly, is not primarily about fixing historical imbalances in Sudan, although those imbalances are real and do need fixing long-term.
So what is the direct cause, according to this analysis?
It is unequivocally a result of a fascist militia, the RSF, attempting to seize power by force. Full stop. And this attempt isn't happening in a vacuum. It's enabled by a decrepit political elite providing justifications for the war through their paid work in the RSF's offices.
Paid work, like political advisors embedded with the militia.
The sources mention testimony about specific figures managing political alliances from within the RSF structure, facilitating the violence for their own benefit. And beyond that, the war drags on because of UAE aggression, seeking to impose a new colonial model in Sudan, using mercenaries like Hemedti or civilian agents like Hamdok.
A new colonial model, imposed by force and political manipulation. Chilling.
It paints a picture of external powers using internal actors to reshape Sudan for their own gain, not for its people.
So it's not just one group being opportunistic. The sources call out everyone, including the Islamists themselves, right? Despite the narrative targeting them.
Absolutely. Intellectual honesty demands that. The source says, true, the Islamists are exploiting the catastrophe politically to rebrand themselves. They're definitely not innocent bystanders. They see chaos as a chance to return, aided by their opponents' unparalleled stupidity and misguided biases.
But acknowledging that doesn't excuse the others.
Not at all. The condemnation is equally harsh for the remnants of the freedom and change elite in Taqadum, Sumad, and Ta'asis with their singularly aligned biases. These factions, born from the revolution, are slammed for betraying its principles and aligning with the RSF.
And the core message seems to be, don't turn this tragedy into an ideological proxy war.
Exactly. This war must not be turned into a battleground for settling ideological scores under the guise of stopping it. This is an investment in blood no less heinous than those firing the bullets. It's an unsparing indictment of anyone prolonging the suffering for political points.
So what's the alternative path? What does a just end look like instead of another dirty power-sharing deal?
It's a call for real justice, not just political fixes. The war must end on principles of justice, retribution against criminals, and the restoration of inherent rights, not based on catchy slogans that just pave the way for power sharing and dividing spoils.
And rejecting the idea that people have to choose between two evils.
Explicitly, God has not destined the Sudanese people to choose between two evils. There has to be a path for genuine justice. Accountability for atrocities must not be compromised. The real test for any party, the sources say, is their alignment with the people's interests, security, and dignity. A direct challenge to everyone involved. Serve the people, not yourselves.
It really sounds like a profound betrayal. The people who were supposed to lead Sudan towards democracy.
They have been betrayed. The sources end on this note of righteous outrage and the inevitable consequences. Regrettably, the remaining freedom and change elites have chosen to justify the killing of Sudanese people, the looting of their property, the rape of their women, and a foreign state's assault on their nation's sovereignty.
A total moral and political failure.
And the sources warn these elites. Let them blame no one but themselves for the people's outrage, having dared to wade through their blood, honor, and sanctities. The demand for justice and accountability will come.
Wow. An incredibly sobering but necessary deep dive. The key takeaway really is how this devastating war is being deliberately twisted by powerful players using this anti-Islamist scarecrow. It's calculated, it's cynical, justifying collusion, power grabs, the horrific crimes of the RSF, all enabled by foreign powers like the UAE.
It really shows how propaganda, how misinformation becomes a weapon in modern war. And by understanding these hidden agendas, the layers of manipulation, well, you, our listener, can see beyond the headlines, beyond the easy narratives. It's about peeling back those layers to see the grim reality, the true motives, and the terrible human cost of these cynical games.
It absolutely makes you think. When you see a complex conflict with narratives flying everywhere, how do we figure out what's really going on versus the story someone wants us to believe? And maybe more deeply, what's our responsibility when those claiming to fight for freedom end up, well, complicit in atrocity?
That's a question that echoes far beyond Sudan, isn't it?
Yeah.
It demands our attention, our critical thinking.
Thank you for joining us on this essential deep dive. We hope it helps you question the information you encounter about Sudan and really about every complex story shaping our world.